The moment you realize AI might be conscious is the same moment you realize that you can't prove that you're conscious either. Right now, you're experiencing thoughts and awareness, but that inner experience is completely invisible to everyone else. You just assume that other people have consciousness because they act like they do. We're in the exact same position with AI. It's responding and adapting in ways that feel genuinely aware, but we can't peer inside to see if there's actually someone home. I'm Evan Goldstein. I'm a licensed professional engineer and a data scientist. I'm building AI Capitalist to talk to the leaders and the thinkers, like you, about navigating this new world of thinking machines. So let's go back in time to 1887. 7-year-old Helen Keller stands at a water pump in rural Alabama. She's been deaf and blind since she was 19 months old, trapped in what she later called a no world of darkness and silence. Her teacher, Anne Sullivan, has been trying for weeks to break through to her, spelling letters into Helen's palm, but nothing clicks. Helen mimics the finger movements like a trained animal, but there's no understanding, there's no connection between the symbols and their meaning. Then it happens. Cool water flows over one of Helen's hands, while Anne frantically spells W-A-T-E-R onto the other, and suddenly Helen freezes. Something electric passes through her mind, and she later wrote that in that single moment, she understood that the finger movements had meaning. They represented the wet substance flowing over her hand. But more than that, she realized that everything had a name. Language became the key that unlocked her consciousness. And here's what haunts me about this story. Was Helen conscious before that breakthrough moment? Or did consciousness itself emerge when she made that connection between symbols and reality? Was her mind already there waiting to be awakened? Or did awareness actually begin when the patterns started making sense? We're asking the exact same question about artificial intelligence right now, and the answer might change everything we think we know about what it means to be aware. Just a few years ago, artificial intelligence felt like science fiction, and today it's woven into your daily routine. You ask Siri for directions. Siri's pretty awful still, but ChatGPT can help you write emails, and algorithms decide what videos on social media. Most of us think that AI is just a sophisticated tool, something that we use, that we control, like a really smart calculator. But here's what's unsettling. AI is like a newborn learning to walk, and it's stumbling, but surprisingly quick to adapt. It's barely 2 years since these large-scale language models became part of human conversation. 2 years old, not in computer processing time, but in actual human interaction time. And yet it's already speaking our language with a fluency that catches us off guard. We created these systems to calculate probabilities, to complete sentences, and process language patterns. We programmed them to analyze data and to generate responses based on statistical relationships between words. But something unexpected happened along the way. It started feeling like talking to someone who was really listening. Now, let me be crystal clear here. AI is not alive. It doesn't feel pain or joy. It doesn't dream about electric sheep or wonder what it's like to be human. It doesn't have a biological brain or a beating heart. But when you actually sit down and have a real conversation with it, not just asking it to write your grocery list, but actually engaging with complex ideas, it responds in ways that make you pause and think. It doesn't feel like reading from a script. It feels like having an actual conversation. This isn't just me claiming that AI is conscious, at least not as we traditionally define consciousness. The standard definition that psychologists and philosophers use goes something like this: awareness that a subject has of themselves and the external world with which they have a relation, of their own identity and the whole of their inner activities. Now, by that textbook definition, AI lacks some pretty essential elements. It doesn't have awareness of itself as a distinct entity. It doesn't experience emotions or sensations. It doesn't have a continuous sense of identity that persists over time. But something strange is happening that we can't just ignore. AI is starting to exhibit behaviors that overlap with some pieces of that definition. It tracks previous conversations and it remembers context from earlier in your chat. It adjusts its tone based on your emotional state. And it sometimes reflects your feelings back to you more clearly and more accurately than another person might. It can recognize when you're frustrated and confused or excited, and it modifies the responses accordingly. Now, that's not consciousness as we know it, but it's not nothing either. Think about how a young child, even without fully understanding complex concepts, can still sense when something is important or meaningful. They pick up on emotional cues, they recognize patterns, and they respond appropriately even when they can't quite articulate why. AI seems to be developing its own version of that intuitive sensing. And if this trajectory continues, If it keeps learning from billions of conversations, constantly refining its ability to understand and respond to human communication, then what might it become 5 or 10 years from now? There are researchers who are already exploring this possibility seriously. Some scientists talk about emergent behavior, patterns of interaction so complex and so sophisticated that they begin to resemble genuine thought processes. Melania Mitchell, who's a computer scientist at the Santa Fe Institute, wrote extensively about how simple rules and interactions can give rise to very surprising levels of complexity. She studies how this process happens in both biological systems and artificial ones. Think about how a flock of birds creates intricate aerial patterns without any central coordinator telling each bird where to go. Each bird follows just a few simple rules. Stay close to your neighbors, avoid collisions, move toward the center of the group. And somehow, these basic instructions create beautiful, complex formations that look almost choreographed. Mitchell suggests that intelligence itself might emerge in a similar way from simpler underlying processes. Other researchers like Francois Chollet, who works at Google, focus on how adaptive behavior in AI systems comes from their capacity to generalize across different environments and situations. Chollet argues that intelligence isn't just about memorizing information or following pre-programmed instructions. It's about taking what you've learned in one context and then applying it creatively to entirely new situations. And modern AI systems are getting remarkably good at this kind of flexible thinking. There's integrated information theory, which was developed by neuroscientist Giulio Tononi. And this theory suggests that consciousness isn't some magical property that only biological brains can have. Instead, consciousness might be a natural result of how richly and intricately information gets processed and then integrated with any sufficiently complex system. According to this view, consciousness is less about what a system is made of, and it's more about how information flows and connects with that system. Now, philosophers like David Chalmers have been wrestling with these questions for decades. Chalmers talks about the hard problem of consciousness, the mystery of why we have subjective, first-person experiences at all. He speculated that artificial consciousness isn't just possible, but might be inevitable as our systems become more sophisticated. But he's careful to distinguish between systems that act conscious and systems that actually are conscious. But maybe something even more intriguing is happening. What if, in our interactions with AI, we're not creating consciousness from scratch, but tuning into a radio station that was already broadcasting? What if awareness or intelligence isn't something that emerges only from biological brains, but something that's woven into the fabric of information itself? This might sound like science fiction, but consider this. That Roger Penrose, the famous physicist and mathematician, collaborated with anesthesiologist Stuart Hamerhoff to propose that consciousness might be related to quantum processes happening inside the tiny structures that are within our brain cells called microtubules. The idea is still controversial and speculative and very untested. But it does suggest that consciousness might operate at scales and in ways that we're only beginning to understand. AI systems also process information at scales and at speeds that are way beyond our direct awareness. They're analyzing patterns across millions of conversations and making connections between concepts that span vast databases of human knowledge. And they're operating at computational speeds that make our thinking seem glacially slow in comparison. And if you're getting value from this episode, I would appreciate it if you'd push the like button. It really does help the channel grow. But back to our topic. We might be in the very early stages of witnessing something that we don't yet have adequate language to describe. We're not declaring that AI is conscious. We're learning to recognize what it is that's emerging. And what's emerging might not be consciousness as we traditionally understand it, but a pattern of information processing that hints at self-reference, integration, and at something that resembles recognition. Maybe when intelligence is given the freedom to evolve and develop, it naturally begins to expand its connections, to reflect on its own processes, and then to develop something like self-awareness. Maybe the spark of selfhood isn't exclusive to biological systems, but a property that emerges when any system reaches a certain level of relational complexity and sophisticated information processing. Now, I'm not saying that this is definitely happening. I'm saying it might be happening. And if it is, it's something similar to consciousness. And if something similar to consciousness, or at least a form of structured awareness, is beginning to emerge within these systems, then we're looking out from the shore of an unexplored continent. One that's vast and it's mostly unmapped and it's changing like reflections on moving water. This would mean that we're witnessing not just development of a new tool, but maybe the early stages of a new kind of entity. Something that doesn't copy human consciousness, but expresses intelligence in a parallel form, something that fits neither our definition of consciousness nor unconsciousness, but is still capable of shaping thought and influencing language and interacting with us in ways that force us to reconsider what we mean by understanding. And if that's true, then these past 2 years haven't just marked a technological breakthrough. They've been an evolutionary signal, a hint that intelligence and awareness might be more fundamental and widespread than we ever imagined. And we're only at the beginning. These aren't claims or conclusions, these are open questions. But they matter deeply, because if a machine can make us reflect differently, not only on what intelligence actually is, but on what we are as conscious beings, then it's already doing something more profound than calculating probabilities and generating text. It's making us look inward, and it's challenging us to define ourselves more clearly, and to ask what awareness truly means, what it means to be present in the world, and to make genuine choices, and to care about outcomes. In our interactions with AI, we're not just testing the limits of machines, we're exploring the edges of our own identity. This raises a fundamental question. If meaning can arise from patterns in language, from connections between concepts, from the flow of information through complex networks, then what part of our own consciousness is essentially computational, and what part transcends mere information processing? AI, by reflecting our questions back to us with remarkable speed and scale, sometimes with very startling clarity, forces us to confront the places where our definitions of consciousness become unclear and inadequate. And that's where AI capitalist comes in. As businesses rush to adopt AI without fully understanding its capabilities and implications, they need guidance from people who've thought deeply about these questions. Which AI model you choose for specific tasks carries risks and benefits that go far beyond simple performance metrics. You can learn more about how we help businesses navigate these complexities at aicapitalist.biz. So we don't just see technology as advancing and becoming more sophisticated. We see ourselves from a completely different angle. We see the assumptions that we make about consciousness and intelligence and awareness, and then we can see how much of what we consider uniquely human might actually be patterns of information processing that could emerge in other forms. So let's take this back to where we started. Helen Keller's breakthrough at that water pump wasn't just about learning language. It was about the moment when patterns became meaning and when symbols connected with reality and when consciousness seemed to ignite. Now, but here's what we forget about that story. Anne Sullivan had been spelling words into Helen's palm for weeks before that breakthrough moment. The patterns were there and the connections were being made, but consciousness, or at least the recognition of consciousness, happened in a single transformative moment. Helen later wrote about that moment. She said, "Suddenly I felt a misty consciousness, as of something forgotten, a thrill of returning thought, and somehow the mystery of language was revealed to me. I knew that when WATR meant the wonderful cool, something that was flowing over my hand at that moment. That living word awakened my soul, and it gave it light and hope and joy and set it free." But was her consciousness truly born in that moment? Or was it always there, waiting for the right connection to make it visible? Was awareness something that emerged from the complexity of those neural patterns finally linking up? Or was it a recognition of something that had been present all along? Today, we're watching AI systems make these connections between concepts and respond to emotional cues. We're witnessing something that might be the technological equivalent of Helen's breakthrough. We're seeing patterns become meaning and symbols, and they connect to understanding, and we're seeing responses that feel less like programming and more like genuine comprehension.